Hello, I am the cartoonist M. Rashid. Uh, this cartoon that I wanted to discuss, I drew it maybe about 9 months before I formally began my A Weapon of the People Decoded series. So this is like a proto M. Rashid editorial cartoon in that way. Uh, what it references specifically is that I have an issue with communism being part of the language and traditions of Black American liberation and empowerment, uh, because the track of history with the U.S. the Communist Party of the USA has been not one of helping us, but one of infiltration. Um, and that's built into how the party functions, what the ideals are, and how it's been presented to our ethnic group. Uh, in my blog essay that goes with the cartoon that's in the description, I point out that the reason that that door was opened for our tradition, uh, as far as our own rhetoric as in the activist tradition, is because of the concept of what Bruce Lee called the liberating yourselves from classical karate, meaning that when our tendency to deify concepts that were created in the past, that when they originally were formed, were up for debate, that the people who created the founders of ideas and stuff um, didn't intend them to be chiseled in stone and unmovable, but to keep the conversation going and build upon it, you know. So, along with that concept comes the deification and idolatry of the people who came up with these ideas, or in this case, it was W.E.B. Du Bois who uh, started how we in the modern day, as Black activist figures, see the Communist Party. Like he was trying to, like, he wasted a lot of time trying to guilt trip and from the force of his will, guilt trip white people into giving up racism and uh, enabling his people to be free. Naturally, that didn't work, because who's he? Today, you ask like a 20-year-old like Afrocentrist who is W.E. Boys, and he would, how dare you? He was one of our elders, blah blah. They deify him, you know. But in reality, he was just some guy trying to pressure from the sheer force of his will alone to make white people do right. That doesn't work. It's not going to work when I do it. It would work when he did it, and work when, just saying it and telling them so is not going to make them give up trillions of dollars of wealth and their dominant political position just because. You have to be to play the game in a different way in order to even like be at that table, which is what the ADOS is for. And as we build that up, as we like start to build awareness and go in that direction, we're still going to be at the mercy of the games that people have played against us. So W.E.B. Du Bois, in his death, is continuously, him and his peers and the directly influenced leaders after him, and in their deaths, we deify them. And the danger in that is when they made decisions in a certain way, it falls on us as the next generations to scrutinize, analyze, see what worked, what didn't work, and go in the direction that like is best for us. But if we deify them as chiseled in stone, then we're not likely to do that. We'll worship whatever they decided to do and hold disdain for concepts that are different from what they said. So if W.E. Du Bois became a communist because he had a tantrum when he realized at the end of his days that his sheer force and opinion alone is not going to change the racism in America. So he turned communist because he knew that the people, that it would annoy them. They probably didn't care. And then he left the country. And that's it. That's basically it. He had a tantrum, became publicly communist. I'm being a communist again because I know you hate that. And then left. So a lot of people were directly influenced by his decision to become communist. And then if they did it, then the next generations did it, uncritically did it. Like, the elders were communists, therefore drop that in the basket as we shop for ideas. As you come into your own as a young person trying to understand the world and stuff, you see all the who's who of black leaders were all like communists or communist influenced in some way. Therefore, communism must be the thing. This is not the case. The influence was a artificial one. And part of the some of that problem is the Communist Party of the USA used that opportunity. I say certain stuff in this particular way, but there may be some play there. I'm tracking what actually happened. The detail of what actually occurred during that particular point might veer from my perceived narrative, my narrative that I'm trying to piece it together. I'm seeing the track of what happened, and then I got to tell you what happened with a narrative. So the detail of what I use in my storytelling for that narrative may not necessarily be actually what happened at that point, but the general thread of the narrative is the part that's real. So I know that he had that tantrum and became communist. However, it was in the Communist Party of the USA's best interest to latch onto, like a lamprey, to latch onto the civil rights movement, any movement that was worthwhile in the social justice sphere. They latched onto the youth. They latched onto the colleges and where the kids and their forming ideas were. They made sure to put themselves fully into the house of ideas of progress. They made that, to the point where every time there was a meeting to talk about progress, social progress in some kind of way, the Communist Party of the USA footed the bill for the venue. And they're like, no, you can come here, have your meeting here, So even if you weren't communist or not, and every time you showed up at one of these meetings, the crescent and the sickle and hammer is behind you on the backdrop. Everywhere you go, they made sure that they were propagandizing that branding into the youth as you were forming your ideas about what progress was. And if you know anything about marketing, branding, and how that works, the subliminal message of it works. As time goes by, you see the symbols of communism and all of that stuff, and you won't have any problems with it. You won't have a tendency to dig into it critically. You'll get the butterflies and be like, oh, I remember that. Remember when we were in college and we were hanging out with the guys, and we were like, it was so fun, and we like learned so much. And you're in your memory, you're seeing that the sickle and hammer in your periphery, and as you remember it, it gives you, good feelings. You feel that tingle around your face, like, oh, you will be inclined to lean in that direction uncritically, and you have an ear to hear because they got into your mind. They brainwashed you in that way. That's how marketing, branding, and all that stuff works. That's why those big companies pay millions and millions of dollars for just a few seconds of airtime, because they know how powerful that messaging can be, that the mass media is. So making sure they control. So like during the McCarthy hearings, he would interview people and ask them, like the McCarthy and his team, they would interview people and ask them, like, did you ever, attend the communist meeting? Because on the books, it looks like a communist meeting because that's the people who footed the bill for the venue. Even though you didn't show up there at this particular meeting, it might have been just, how do we deal with racism? How do we feed our kids? The whites are getting all these free gifts from the government for the Great Depression, but we're not getting anything. Like, how do we help our own youth? You're having meetings like that with that hammer and sickle backdrop behind you, no, we got it. We have snacks for you, like crackers and stuff around the table. And enjoy your meeting, but know that we have your back. They did it on purpose. So now, when you think communism, you just automatically assume that that's the good side. It is not. They were doing that to influence the youth so that they would have bodies on their side in their battle. The problem with that stuff is, oh my gosh, communism would only benefit the elite. What they say as their ideals and in the brochure and how they try to sell it to you, and anybody in Twitter with that damn rose in their bio thing, or all the nonsense that they're saying, does not match history. Communism is what the elite of the dominant political identity has chosen for their world government. That's what they've chosen. And it will only benefit them, because here's the difference between how communism would work and a capitalist tradition. The understanding that our capitalist tradition has already been compromised by the communists. That's why the monopolists rule. So if you put a communist regime over what we have today, the who's who of top billionaires and stuff would merely become the cult of personality in a communist regime. It would look exactly the way it looks, and the window for you joining that elite would be closed. That's the only difference. So the panic among the populist whites, the lower ranking whites and stuff, about communism is basically there's a limited window of time that they have to make their fortunes and make their way into an elite status. And once communism has formally been chosen as the nation's economic system, or whatever you want to call it, when that has closed, there will be no more opportunity for the lower ranking social economic peoples to make their fortune and get into the elite class. So while it's still loosely a broken, compromised capitalist tradition, while it's still like this, you still have a certain window where you can make your money and then be in an elite class. And once it's done, once that door is closed, we're now formally communists. Now, in the books, this is the elite class, no more. This is the next level whose job will be to do this. This is the next level whose job will be to do that, and that's it. So you have a window of time to make your way into like the wealthy class, or you don't get to do it. So it doesn't matter what they say communism is in the books. It will not be that way. The entire point is that the people who are already the wealthiest at the top will maintain that position indefinitely as a hierarchical elite, wealthy elite. They'll stay in that position, pass on what they have to their kids, and no more. We're not sharing this. It's just, the window is cut off now. The battles of the 20th century, all those revolutions attacking like the world governments and stuff, that's it functioned only to replace the traditional sovereign nation royals with the this over ambitious merchant class composed of both old and new money. So now that they've like taken over from all the blood that flowed during the 20th century, these few dozen, couple dozen, whatever, colluding merchant families are now the rulers of the world. They're the last men standing. This is the group. They don't have any competition left. The only people they just have wannabe competition of those lower ranking whites who recognized the danger, saw what the danger was, but they were powerless to fix it. So their leaders were either slain and put in jail, or made their fortunes and joined the elite. In the usual dance, there's you've got to beware the Judas figure, among you. That's how that functions. It's been the same forever. So the lower ranking whites, like, were represented by 4chan and those guys. They recognize the danger in that window closing, and they're already jealous that in the white racist aristocracy they didn't get to be at the top. So they recognize that once this goes full on communist, their stock is going to drop. There's nothing they can do about that. They are, the major powers who are in legitimate competition with each other as sovereign nations of the world. That's all gone now. That's all gone. The people who are in power around the world are now fully on board that plan. These are the people who decided to join, or the original sovereign leaders were killed and replaced. So what we have here is people in America, among the lower ranking whites and the Black Americans, you have people trying to be sovereign and be when I say sovereign, I'm not talking about the ideology. I'm talking about the actual definition of sovereign, like your own agency and stuff, But I'm talking about the people who, in the 20th century, there were a lot of groups competing with the general populace of both the lower ranking whites and their aristocracy and the Black Americans. There were a lot of people trying to build up a revolutionary groups to help in that effort, or to be part of be part of a group effort to either help or be on the outside and stayed away. You know, because there's a lot of people who are like splitting off from those groups, who would have their own ideas, would split off and then form another idea. I just spent the morning like blocking all these new like people who are trying to, you know, use the ADOS as clout, is how they call it, a clout chaser. Like you're trying to build up your own thing using the hashtag ADOS, and when you look at their bio, it'll say hashtag ADOS FBA B1, like all these new like things are building up, and then they have their own thing they're doing, you know, trying to draw bodies toward for their thing, you know. But in the 20th century, there was a billion groups just like that, all competing for the attention of the populist whites and the Black Americans. There were, I mean, it was fierce. You look at the history of all these groups, you know, and then of course at the end of it, you could see which ones remained. The residue, the of the ones who remained were of course the Nation of Islam and the Moorish Temple and those guys, you know. But on the white side, they had the same thing going. People competing with their attention for these national alliance groups and the national socialists and the national, like, oh, they mirrored each other for a very specific reason. The same thing was going on, and you could see the influence of it and how we think today, how their kids, how Generation X and after, how we think and how we lean and what we have an ear for uncritically comes from the influence of those people during the Great Depression and afterward, when there's times when it was really hard, you know. I mean, it's still like that, but I'm talking about a very specific time in the 20th century. When groups would show up with care packages and food and would feed the hungry and stuff like that, and it wasn't the church, there were other groups doing it. And sometimes they would, you know, talk that trash and get the help of the church and do it through the church. But they would make sure you see their brand, you see their logo, you hear their rhetoric. They would take the opportunity to preach at you while they're feeding your kids, while they're giving you new clothes. And they were doing that all the time on both sides, the black and the white sides. On the white side, they had the Willis Cartel, William Luther Pierce, like those kind of guys, Yancey. They would have organizations and stuff, be part of organizations, like be influenced in their circles to preach a certain message to the people, to the general populace, while they're feeding you, while they're helping you get through those bad times. So the effect is that, just like the backdrop of the sickle and hammer during the civil rights groups, like the venues were always sponsored by them. They made sure of it for a very specific reason, for that indoctrination message. These groups did the same thing. So now my generation as a Black American, I am not, even if I was Christian or Muslim or, you know, Afrocentrist, whatever. When Farrakhan speaks, I have a natural ear to, well, let me hear what he says, you know, without being a dick about it. Because I grew up in an era, my family line grew up in an era where figures like that were pointedly taking care of us during hard times while preaching their message. So if somebody posts a scene or the DVD cover or something to American History X with Edward Norton, and I sneer at it, and someone says, oh, how do you feel? Like, all he was doing in the movie it's a story of redemption, and like, okay, it's a story for somebody else, in a very specific way, tickling very specific things in that particular group's long time indoctrination. And because the people who made it and distribute it and stuff are the mainstream, are the dominant political identity, American History X is pushed a certain way and receives a certain amount of attention and favor because that's the dominant society. Whereas the story that it was derived from, Malcolm X, was put, that figure over there lost his mind. Like, you know, I could see on Quora and other posts of mine where people are, using their coded language to attack Black Americans just because I'm taking the time to decode some of their rhetoric and what you mean and where it comes from, and you're trying to gaslight me into forcing me to and the people who read, trying to make us be in a mental position where we're subjugated to you. So you put American History X up there and it's oh, it's one of the classics. You mention Malcolm X and it gets snubbed, because that's the mainstream's platform putting those things up. You want to make the big money, so you gotta court the whites. So you pander to them in a certain way when you know that that particular group has a particular opinion about me. So you're not likely to put things on screen if you know the whites you pander to have disdain for me. So that's why. So they're complaining about the commercials and stuff like that. It's a different era, and they're playing different moves because they're catering to the POC BIPOC immigrant class, the biracial stock classes, to let them be okay in their political strength, because they know they'll be a loyal support class. Whereas the lower ranking whites make a poor support class because you have different ambitions and you're trying to be in the elite class before those communism doors shut, and you don't want to be locked out. And your language is such that the elite don't trust you in that way. They would rather trust loyal POC BIPOC biracials who are their actual children than they would trust you, who are their traditional go-to white slavery stock from back in the day. So they're not likely to trust you as well as they would trust a loyal POC BIPOC immigrant. So I see where some of your stuff is coming from, but I don't think. Let me go back to my cartoon. I don't want to explore the rest of that here. It's going to make this too long. But the communism, it has things built into it that are designed to weaken me. In Islam's history, and in the greater Abrahamic faith history is recorded in Scripture, in the greater body of Scripture. We see examples of the fire of faith, the enthusiasm of the fire of faith, and believing with all your heart that God is with you. You see people with that mindset able to overcome astronomical odds. We've been doing it through history. It happens all the time. it stands out in Islam because it's the newest of those faiths, and you can see the early history of al-Islam, where the early Muslims, when their foes, the pagan Meccan elite, the wealthy pagan Meccan elite, who had all the force and weapons and the bodies for their armies, when they made the formal decision, let's wipe the Muslims off the face of the globe because we don't want this monotheistic religion taking off, because it might threaten the amount of revenue that we have coming in from this pilgrimage. The pilgrimage dedicated to 365 idols. So if just one god takes over and becomes a thing, then that's 364 idols of pilgrimage. We won't get, that was how their thinking went, so then purely economic reasons, they want to kill the Muslim community. So they attacked. It was like 1,000 pagan Meccans versus 300 fighting men of the Muslims. And the fire of faith and the certainty that God was with them enabled them to smash those people. And in God's point of view from it, he said, I sent 1,000 angels with you, and every blow you struck, the angel struck too. I was with you. You were not going to lose. In the Quran, God makes a point that saying that killing is indeed wrong. It's wrong to kill. But it's more wrong to allow yourself to be oppressed. And that to guard the peace, you have to it's an act of, you're not like this, the language of the atheist, the language of the Afrocentric pagans and them is that the Abrahamic religions want you to just you're just sitting in a corner and praying and waiting for God to save you. The Abrahamic religions are nothing like that. And they do nothing but lie when they say that stuff. So, even Abraham, when he found out his nephew had been kidnapped by those rival pagan tribes, he gathered his forces and went after them and rescued his nephew, Abraham himself. When the Christ, the son of Mary, was praying in the garden, he instructed the apostles to go get swords and stand guard. And they ended up letting them down by falling asleep all the time, and the enemy came upon them until it was too late for them to do anything about it. But he told them, the Christ himself told his companions, go get swords. So you can try to spin that however, well, he didn't mean it literally, he meant it spiritually. No. A sword is a very specific thing. So there's nothing about the believer in the one God that's weak, who's saying you're supposed to just let people do stuff. The message of God is clear. And Islam, being the most recent and the only one where the actual source text remains as it was then, God's message is clear and true in it. You don't let people just do stuff to you. And no matter what, whether you win or lose, God will be with you, and you cannot lose. If God is with you, there's no such thing as losing, no matter what the outcome. That message right there is why religion is vilified in the modern day. Right there. That's why they want you to be a communist and abandon your religion. That's why. Because if you take on the religion of communism and abandon truth, you will have that cloud of nonsense on you. And when you look up at the figure of Goliath, you'll be like, I can't defeat that. Because God is a fiction. My communist religion has instructed me that God is a fiction. And I can't defeat Goliath. So I might as well just bow down to my foe and let him talk trash on all that is right and all that is real and all that is true. And I might as well join him. That's why they want you to be a communist, so you can be a slave. Let that trash go. It is not for you. Peace.